Greetings, YouTube. Today I'll be talking about The Invisible Man, The Life and Liberties of H.G. Wells by Michael Corrin. Now, if you'd said H.G. Wells to me prior to this book, I would have said Time Machine, The Invisible Man, War of the Worlds. That's what I would have said. Because I was incredibly ignorant of the man's prodigious output, the reams of articles and short stories that he wrote in his career, that the contemporary fiction, what we would call contemporary fiction or romance stories and drama that he wrote, completely unaware of that. And I was unaware of his nonfiction, his political writing. So I guess in some regards, I'm really glad I read this because it really showed me the full depth and breadth of Wells's corpus and his scope, which was far vaster than I thought it was. Um, I did kind of make me smile that when I bought this book, originally it was $20, then somebody sold it for $6 down here, and then sold it for $1, and I don't know how much I paid for it. It's in horrible physical condition. I think I may have picked this up at a Remainders place for like a dime. But I was also unaware of the fact that Wells was a bigot, that he was a screaming misogynist and emotionally and verbally abusive to his partners, that he was a serial philanderer, adulterer, that he was also, for his time, a feminist, that he was an anti-Semite and a really hardcore racist, wanting black people, brown people, yellow people just to be bred into non-existence. And he was also a socialist, believing in a system that supports the people and not the oligarchs at the top, and in a one world government. That he and I have some annoying parallels, because he has some beliefs that I definitely agree with, and he has some the beliefs that I find vile and toxic. He treated people around him horribly. He was often a drama queen. Um, for example, demanding medical attention when he had a sore throat and telling people he was dying when in actuality he had a sore throat. Um, he had a horrible issue with ego, and he was easily bruised and could not take criticism in any way, shape, or form. And I'm sure that we all have that to a certain extent. He was a fascinating man, but he was very problematic. He was filled with a lot of rage and hate, and I can relate to that. And while I may be working on divesting myself of it, Wells didn't. I find it interesting that the author calls him on his anti-Catholicism, because Wells was very much opposed to the Catholic Church, and the author of the book lists the reasons. Wells did these unreasonable things, except all the points that Wells had about how horrible the Catholic Church was being in his lifetime, and Wells died in 1946, turned out to be true. The Catholic Church really was as horrible, and is as horrible, as Wells thought it is, or was, I should say. It really was lying to the people and hiding conspiracies and crushing people's lives. And it was just being a terrible organization, and it still is. It is the largest single religious organization in the world, led by a single leader, and it is one of the foundation stones, one of the cornerstones of our toxic patriarchy and the toxic masculinity associated with it. So the Catholic Church really is as bad as Wells thought it was. And the author is completely off base in that regard. And that just isn't my bias. The author, I don't know how the author could write what he wrote, because he was writing from his historical perspective of the modern era. Wells wasn't. Wells may have been basing his things on some personal bias, but he was also right. So I don't know how the author could do that unless he was not aware of his own bias towards the Catholic Church. And the author made a point at the beginning of the novel, saying, or rather, the book, saying that he wanted to make sure that he was presenting Wells in an honest light, and in past works they had been far too favorable. I had no reference there, because again, this is the first book on Wells as a biography I've ever read. But coming out of the gate, it was like, okay, let's see what this guy's bias looks like. And for the most part, he seems pretty even-handed. But in this one regard, that Wells was far more right than wrong when it came to the Catholic Church, and the author was utterly off base. Which I will admit does call into question slightly how much else may he have been off. So I'm not 100% sure if what his apparent unbiased or at least fairly even-handed way of looking at Wells's life, maybe it wasn't as even-handed. Maybe he was being harsher or kinder to Wells in different areas that I was unaware of. And if I didn't know the reality of the Catholic Church, maybe I wouldn't have been privy to that potential issue with the author. And I really don't see myself reading a lot of other material on Wells's life, so I may remain ignorant in that regard. But the book is readable. It does go in a little bit too much detail, I think, because every time he brings up a person, there's this little mini biography about the person. And I think a lot of the little mini biographies are kind of important, but I think a lot of them go a little long. I think you could have tightened them up a bit. And I think didn't need to know quite as much about some of the support people in Wells's life as I now know, or I knew at the time. I forgot most of what he wrote because these people were minor historical figures at best. He also quotes a lot of actual texts written during Wells's life about Wells and from Wells, letters and diary entries and things like that. And while I can understand the historical perspective that this lends the book and gives you an insight into the world that Wells lived in, I find a lot of it really boring. Reading people's diary entries talking about a very minor aspect of their life and how it was tangentially connected to Wells, I didn't find riveting. So I think he could have been a little more sparing with those historical documents. I once heard someone say that if for every equation you put in a book, you cut the readership in half. Well, I don't think it's quite that bad. I think that he may have alienated some people by putting so much of other texts in there. Also, it was a smaller font, which I find annoying. But all in all, if you are a Wells fan or want to know about Wells, this may be a good starting point. I don't necessarily think this should be necessarily your end point. It may well be mine. But it's an intriguing book. And it kind of makes me sad that Wells got so many things right and apparently got so many things wrong. And maybe that just makes him very, very human.